Thank you very much. Good evening. Wow. Huge crowd. Excuse me, but I will have to talk in English, and I'm sure there is a minority of English-speaking people here, and I prefer minorities, so if you don't mind, I'll stick to English. Snøhetta actually is a mountain. And this mountain area that you see here is called Dovre. It's a huge mountain area. And Snøhetta is actually the tallest peak. Only 2,864 meters, which means it's the 24th tallest mountain in Norway. So it's far down the line, but I can assure you it's the most beautiful. Now, the office name doesn't come from this region, because in the middle of Oslo there is a bar, very brown, we drink beer, and it's called the Hall of Dovre. And when we established the company in '87, we established it on top of this beer hall. We had a stairway moving down, bypassing the toilets into the bar. And we were on top of this Hall of Dovre, which is this mountain area, so of course the name is Snøhetta. And to understand our architecture, I think it is extremely important to start off with what we are, how we're organized, how we're working. As already mentioned, we have two offices, one in New York and one in Oslo. And as you can see, both of these two pictures are about the same scale. We keep looking for the location by the water. Water is extremely important, and of course we'll get back to that. But there is something else which is more important, and that is the collaborative elements of architectural work. Masters don't work. Teams work. There is no way today, in the complexity of this type of architecture that we're dealing with, that you can ever say that there is one person responsible for this or that piece of architecture. It's always a group. It's very complex. Now, how do you achieve to have specialists of different professions working together? You do it by degenerating their specialities. We call it transpositioning. Imagine an orchestra where the guy who normally plays the violin, when he's rehearsing, he plays the trumpet. Why would he do that? Because he knows the instrument, the trumpet. But when there is a concert, he goes back and plays the violin. We do the same. You, as a landscape architect, are allowed to be an artist. The artist is allowed to be an architect. The architect can be an engineer. The engineer can be a sociologist. Sociologist can be an author. But when you get to production, you go back to your special task. But in the process, you are transpositioning yourself into someone else's profession. It's extremely important because today we are finding that specialists are defending their specializations. And that is ruining every process that we're up against in contemporary architecture. Now, how does this start? It starts with the focus on the singular, on the individual. Every individual is an extreme value to a collaborative. And only based on the individuals can you create the plural, the collaborative itself. So the individual aspects of generating architecture in a collaborative becomes the driving force, allowing them to take their own decisions within a framework. So this is our organizational diagram. Now what does that mean? It means that not only do we transposition, but we don't locate projects together in a large office space. We have one person working on one project here, beside another person working on another project here, and another and another. So we have a completely horizontal distribution of information between the different projects and the different professions. To maintain this, of course, we have to climb this mountain Snøhetta once a year with the office. We've done it every year since we started. And it's actually quite fantastic because, you know, you have to save people from dying, which is great. and all of a sudden you become a hero within your own company, which is, you know, a way of bonding, you could say. Now, I'm not very romantic, and the office isn't very romantic, but there is an aspect of romanticism that we need to take in today, which is relating to these very, very small moments of experiences that you have and you share with others. It's like when you travel with someone to one place and you have the same experience without talking to each other. You know you can rely on this person when he's gone on a trip on his own, coming back and explaining you about this trip. You know you can rely on these experiences. That is being romantic. So, every Monday, we gather the whole office to what we call traffic. And traffic is information, distribution of tasks, work. We can change in this position. We don't have fixed project leaders, but we have a huge pool of project leaders that can go in and commence at different levels of the project. This information works perfect, and it's verbal. One of the most important things that we're dealing with these days is the differentiation, or let's put it in a different manner. The digital tools that we're facing today are generating very homogeneous architecture. We're facing a huge task to translate these tools, the digital tools that we're using, into analog results. Which means that there needs to be a focus on the actual workshop element in an office. And that's why we're going away from being a studio to becoming a workshop, where at least 30 to 40% of what we're doing every day is related to this workshop. And to manage that, we have bought this robot. It's fantastic. It can also serve beer if you want to. But what it does, it translates from a digital information into analog products in a not custom manner. You can mass produce with slightly differences. It can carve, it can stack, it can weld. But what it mainly does is to give us the confidence of the production line that we're actually facing in relationship to the building industry. Architects don't necessarily consult, they create. And it's a big difference being a consultant and being a creator. A creator actually fulfills a task from A to Z, and he knows where the last screw is going. So, based on that, of course, there's a series of architecture where this actually happens. In the span of temporary architecture to long-term architecture, spanning from lifespans of about 4 days to maybe 400 years. Now, how can you expect that a society can react to these enormous differences in time spans? Like this little pavilion inside a museum, which we did some years ago, which were up there only for a week. It's a ready-made. It's a tube. You can buy it. You just place it into the museum. You put in the information that you need, and off you go, and already you have a ready-made piece of architecture. Or, it's like this pavilion that I did with Olafur Eliasson at the Serpentine Park, the Serpentine Gallery. You know, they invite these architects and artists every year to do a pavilion. It stays up for some few months, and it's focusing on not the building as such, but the building actually being in the park. And for that reason, it generates a certain activity of cultures. Now, this pavilion was about climbing on the outside of the pavilion to the top. And as you come to the top, you walk in, not the other way around. And by that, you generate a vertical movement relating to the space without moving through the space until you actually move into the space at the top of the building. Now, I'll get back to this element of eye height and horizon later, because it's one of the most essential things in architecture is, where is your eye? Your eye always looks at things from the periphery, and your ears are always in the center. So if you look at this, in the perception of a space, you'll understand that the acoustics and the visual aspects work in two different ways. So we had cultural activities here, and you can recognize Linton Kwesi Johnson quoting poems in this space. Now, of course, the color and the depth of this color is a skin color, also of the pavilion. And we worked for months just to be able to get the depth of this color to move away from the copper and into the skin tone. But it stayed up only for about 2.5, 3 months. Then it was taken down and sold to a pavilion collector. Another pavilion, very short span, only for a week, is this little tubaloon. It's a temporary structure, which is there to actually throw the music that is being played within to a much larger audience in Kongsberg, outside Oslo. It's a very simple structure, a stretch structure, but by blowing up the edges around the structure of this item, you tension the textile, and by that it's completely smooth. You can put lights on it, there is always show. A lot of the things that we have been doing in this temporary installation element are things that are framing certain things, putting them into context in a very simple manner. This is from the first project at Kivik in Sweden, where we really just took, these concrete boxes that you find to have passages under roads. You can buy them also, it's very simple. Just place them into the landscape, you drill some holes, and voila, you have a museum. Now, the advantage with these temporary installations is they are beyond building regulations. And it is important that temporary elements, temporary architectures, challenge the building authorities at all times. Because otherwise, there wouldn't be any room for experimentation in what we call real architecture. And real architecture is doomed if we don't manage to maintain it within the qualities of being human. Architecture is nothing without people. There doesn't exist any relationship between architecture and architecture unless there is a human between. So this actually then became one of the smallest museums in the world. It only has one photograph, which is fine, glass on each end. But then slowly things start turning, and you do start to involve yourself with architectural objects. You start looking at horizontalities and verticalities and try to understand what is a roof, what is a wall, and what is everything in between. Of course, in Norway, we're blessed with snow, which actually means that you have the possibility of measuring these slight tilts at certain times of the year when the snow is falling. And this was for the Winter Games Olympics in 1993. It might be interesting to notice that this was the first time that, let's say, the Norwegian public accepted wood as a public material. Before that, it had been a very domestic material. For your private house, you can use wood. For a larger museum, no wood. And after 93, that changed drastically in the whole of Scandinavia. One advantage of doing museums is that you can plan the exhibition from the very beginning. So this cantilever that you see here from this structure actually has its foundation in here, which meant that we could plan the exhibition with the construction of the building and actually be able to do an exhibition which you couldn't do without. Now this is the cheapest sort of pavilion museum that we've ever done, and we call it the sausage building. It's actually just one profile, and you buy the length of the profile you can afford. So if you can only afford a sausage this long, then it's only this much you get. And we had a barometer in the town hall at Karmøy, it's my home island, which was showing how much donations were coming into this building. And at the same time, we're showing how long it was. Now, of course, this building is really cheap. It's done by effort by the locals. We treated the walls here with sour milk in order to increase the acid in the concrete, to have the moss grow on this wall, and today it's much more mossy. And at the same time, it has woven juniper, which is a very old building method to clad buildings, and still staying up there. But you know, architecture doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it needs to be really good. And we introduced, in the continuation of these elements, what we call piercing landscapes. It's a series of architectures that we did very early, where we started looking at the interaction between a built object and a landscape. Now what we did, we took, in the relationship to this Petter Dass building, which you see here, we took diamond wire and cut through this mountain. It's about 60 meters long, 12 meters tall, and it leaves, and it cuts the mountain like butter. It's beautiful. You know, you have this fantastic wire with diamonds on it, and it's slowly. And it leaves the most beautiful mountain. And then we just located the building inside, so it's actually piercing through this landscape, and leaving this old church completely behind and not touching it, because this church was protected. So by doing that, we actually managed to connect two sides of this hill. One is the water side, which is in this direction, and the other one is the church side, which you just saw. So here you can see through, between the stone wall and the glass wall towards the water. In the opposite direction you have the church, which you see here. Now, again, this interactiveness between materials which are on site and things you bring to the site from outside becomes extremely important in the relationship between what is old and what is new. And it's always a combination of very archaic elements combined with almost high-tech issues. You will see that in some of our other projects. This is the view from the inside. And again, you see these small projects that you keep developing continuously, smaller and smaller. You know, there is no sort of limit to how small they can be, actually. This is a wild reindeer observation center close to Snøhetta mountain. You see Snøhetta in the background. And it's even open, it's nothing. And it's tiny. Not all of them are tiny, this is a town hall, but again, it's about this variation of the temporary, the long-term, the small, and the large. And that allows the office to develop project leader skills at an early stage. You can come straight out of school, basically, and run a project, which is extremely important in the further education. Now, materials, of course, in this case. The steel is from Hamar, which is where this town hall is standing, and it's cast by locals. Or industrial systems of a different manner, like this one, which is what we called Snøhetta modular. It was every architect, at some point in life, has to try to make a modular house. I mean, forget it. Otherwise, you're not an architect. And if you move into that, also, everyone who tries has to fail. And so did we. But we at least built some few of them, like this one, that came up within a period of 3 days. It was finished and industrialized, but you can't lift the industrialization of an element house unless you have a lot of money, I can assure you. So if you're ever going to try, get the money first, then do the production line. But it is important to do these tasks, because one of the challenges we have, of course, in architecture today is that there are so many elements left over on site. The recirculation of materials, the overuse of materials becomes one of the most essential elements in trying to do environmental architecture, and this was part of what we were trying to do here. We even developed it into a house that we call We Do, meaning the architects, where you can slide these things out. You have a small space for a family, only 60 square meters house. Or a project that we call You Do, which is you, the public, and you could design whatever you wanted with the elements. But we get even smaller than one-family houses, like small spas, or things like small bathtubs, or the smallest hotel that we've ever done, the one-room hotel. This is the hotel, and this is the room. Or the absolute smallest is the fountain for a cat. You see it here in the middle. Now, if you take into consideration that the size of an office with 15 different nationalities, about the same amount of women and men, homosexuals and straightforwards, if you take that and start mixing it, you will see that the aspect of how to design things are related to the process, then leading to the product. And then it doesn't matter if it's big or small. Only thing that matters is that you have at least your brain and your heart together in the right place. And that's how it started with the library in Alexandria, which I'm going to show very quickly. But of course, it was an enormously important breakthrough for Snøhetta to be able to win this competition in 1989, many years ago. And since we built this building, we've only built one big building in addition, which is the Opera House in Oslo. So, period of 20 years, 2 big buildings. We're an extremely slow office. And if you think of that in a larger context, I think it's okay, because some things need time. If you speed on too much, you forget who you are, you get sleepless nights, and after all, it's only architecture. So, if you look at the situation here, you will see a very high-tech roof for what was, let's say, Egypt at the time. Egypt was closed. It had import restrictions. It had restricted amount of materials that could be used. And the organization of building larger buildings was not in place. So, we had to open the custom rates and find custom rates for material imported. We had to operate with local engineering companies and local contractors to try to generate what we would call Egyptian public ownership, which I'll talk about also when it comes to the opera later. But this roof then became the most obvious cooperation between an Egyptian and an Austrian company, developing new technologies for this roof. And of course, now I can talk about the horizon. The horizon is the reference of everything that deals with time. Whether you have a clock or a computer that rings whenever time is over, the body will react to day and night. There's no question. And that means that the body clock always refers to where the sun goes up and down behind, which is the horizon. And in this particular case, this building is relating itself to the horizon of Alexandria. It's coming out of the water, but not actually. It's going below the ground at the same time. I got it caught in my neck. Surrounding this building, you have a stone wall. It's like a shrine. It's a shrine for books. And this shrine protects the books, like the light coming into the main library. And of course, in this constellation, you work with day and night, because the horizon is the description of the day. And the library space is the most important and direct forward element that translates singular in the plural. I'm sure every one of you here understand my lecture differently, but at least you're doing it together. So from that point of view, a library is a place where you are more or less alone together. You do similar things, but the things you catch in, you do in a common space. So of course here we were happy to be able to design everything, including chairs, lamps, tables. That's a different story. Maybe mention, these library shelves are interesting because normally in an open space library you would have the light coming from the top. Yes? And as you bend forward, you throw a shadow onto the back of the books. So what happens then? You can't read the back. So we light it from the side. Yeah, materials used. And again, it's all about people. What is important is that this horizontality of this building is representing more than just being part of the vertical and horizontal skyline of Alexandria, a Mediterranean city. What it's doing is saying, okay, take a break. Be a little more slow. Take it easy. And we managed to get people to come there and be slower, take the time. And actually we have more than 8,000 visitors a day visiting this. And this leads me to the second large building that we've done, which is the Opera House in Oslo. Now, as you will see, this building also intersects with the water. Why does it do that? If you look at the concept of a borderline between water and land, it's a very explicit place, because it's a change between two elements, water and land. Now, what we decided with the opera was to put a wooden wall exactly where the water and the land meet. This means that the land belongs to Oslo, and the water belongs to Norway. So not only do you have a borderline between two elements, but you actually have different ownership. The waters are being owned by the government, and the land is being owned by Oslo. So then, of course, we put all the working places. 600 people are working in the Opera House, and the factory of the Opera House we put in Oslo. But the public we put in the water. And by covering that element with something like a social monument element, we had an opera house. Not more, not much less. Now, what is it? It's a building that, again, negotiates between the element of water and the sky. It is moving and crossing into the actual fjord. So, at nice days, you can walk there and put your toe into the water. And it actually integrates with the public. How are the plans looking of this opera house? Everything is spanning from north to south. You can look through the building, the public plazas, the lobbies, the theaters, what we call the back of house highway, where everyone meets before they go on stage or to their offices. You have workshops and so forth. And really, this is the organizational diagram of this opera house. Of course, you have 1,300 rooms under this, but that really doesn't matter, because this is where 60% of a concept in architecture is laid. This type of simplification. The other element is what we call thresholding. On the way to an experience, you have expectations. Some people dress up at home, some don't. Some people have certain expectation, and on the way to this performance, you have to expect to be transformed as a person, as a story. So that's why you come over this narrow bridge first towards the opera. Everyone gets squeezed together horizontally. Then you come into the plaza first, and then you come into the main lobby, where again you go through an extremely low entrance. You can touch it like this. And then the space gets taller and taller. And then you go and pick up a ticket, and you see the wooden wall. You look back through the building towards the south, or you have to go and have a look at Olafur Eliasson's piece of work, which is sitting in the middle. Now again, this is about time and slow time. There's a slow changing of light. It takes about 10 minutes, this movement, to slow down the motion of people once they're inside. And inside these, you have the toilets. Okay, they're black. When you come into the main hall, you move past Olafur Eliasson's slowly changing installation. You go and have a piss, and you hang your coat, or you sit at a bench where the roof meets the floor. Now it's really so intimate and so low that children play there all the time. You come back into the main lobby, you look back up at people on the outside at a different level. So now they are carrying their horizon with them, and you're carrying yours. These two different positions, inside and outside, still looking through the building, are essential, because architecture is standing still, and you are moving. Architecture is not moving, it's not a car, it's not a plane. It's standing still. So then you move up the stairs into the wood. It's like being inside the trunk of a tree. Now you've changed from the wide entrance situation, flush ceilings, into a complete wooden situation. And from there, oak wood. And from there, you move further up the stairs, or you take a lift. And in the lift, you are allowed to change material because it's moving. Otherwise, you have to argue really hard before you change the material. If you want to change from glass, wood, stone, you have to know why you're changing the material. And when you're detailing as an architect in the office, you're never allowed to have more than 3 materials meet at the same time. If you have more than 3 materials, detail out. So what happens is, you have a conscious relationship between when you're inside and outside. You look back into the lobby, but you're inside the wood. And then, of course, you move into the main hall, which is the same wood, oak wood, as you saw before. Only now it's treated with ammonia. We call it sort of Stalinistic Coca-Cola Shakespearean experience. It's dark, it's direct, it's heavy. We even designed the textile of the chairs. If you're a performer, you're inside this space, it's intimate, it's close. And the wood, because of this ammoniac element, the gas of ammoniac, which treats this oak, even if you bring a knife and chop off a piece, it still has the same color. It oxidizes. And the chandelier, consisting of thousands of crystals, handmade, becomes a reflector. And this space is nothing but an acoustic instrument. If the singers can't hear themselves on stage, it's a failure. If you, as the public, can't hear the singer, it's a failure. If what we call the pre-delay doesn't work, which means from the moment the first tone reaches your ear isn't perfect, it's a failure. If the reverberation time doesn't work for the orchestra as a total, it's a failure. So this whole house, really in the end, is all about the success of the acoustics of this space. So then we were lucky to have another artist work with us, Pei White from LA, and she did this stage curtain, which basically is this curtain to back of house, yes, or stages. And as you know, the back of house are all aluminium clad. And Pei took and crumbled aluminium foil at home, kitchen thing. Crumble it, picture it, and then, in fact, just weave it. There isn't one element of silver thread in this piece. It's all based on the colors which are reflected as if it was an illusion. And we've, of course, on the back of house issues. What is the biggest problem with these huge cultural buildings being placed inside our towns these days? It's that everything that is of interest is hidden. All the workshops that are really interesting, all the rehearsal spaces that are really interesting, are squeezed into the middle of the building and hidden away from the public. To avoid this, we did this little cultural building where we put the rehearsal room here in the big window. So when the performances are not happening in the building, there is still everyday, all-day activities. We did the same with the opera. All the rehearsal rooms, ballet rehearsal rooms, orchestra, this is the choir rehearsal room, other piano rehearsal rooms, or the workshops. We oriented it towards the outside of the building. So you can actually walk by and see stage settings being produced, painted. You can see the wigs that they make, you can see the costumes. You can walk around the building and you can sort of follow the production that you will later see on stage, which is a great experience, and we're doing that far too little. We are continuously preoccupied by hiding things we don't think belongs to society, but in fact they do. And of course here also we could design door handles and stuff like that, but I won't bore you with it. Because the most important thing is the interactivity between artists involved and the architect. In the Opera House we had 23 artists working with us at the most. 2 others of them were Løvås or Bagla. They are actually textile artists, and they made these metal facades And of course, again, it's all to do with the light and the slow changing of these conditions. And these patterns come from an old weaving pattern in Norway, and it's translated through the computer, of course. But also what it does, it gives stability to the aluminium cladding. The biggest piece of art of the Opera House is the roof. Now you can imagine that there is no building regulation in this world that will allow anybody to crawl up on this piece of architecture. It's dangerous. The first day we had 2 broken teeth and a broken arm. But what the heck, architecture is more important than broken teeth and a broken arm. And it's been developed by artists and only allowed because it is defined as a piece of art. Now, if you move through this and say, to the extent that the experience of generating this piece of art is more about the process than whether it's integrated in architecture or not, then you're talking art and architecture. And make no mistake, they're not the same. Architecture is architecture and art is art. And here, the art is being cut out of the mountain in Italy. It's Carrara marble, the whole roof. And we had a huge discussion in Norway politically. Why isn't it Norwegian white stone? Because there is no white stone in Norway. And, you know, politicians sometimes drive me nuts. You know, they would keep arguing, yes, but there must be a white stone somewhere. You'll probably find something. Yes, no, there is no white stone. So what we had to do was to develop sort of each piece that is cladding this roof with the artists as one element. Now, and you will see that this here doesn't have a joint here nor here. So this is one piece. We have about 30,000 pieces of stone like this set into a certain pattern. Every piece of stone is designed for a small lift, for a compatibility, has a number, has a location, and we know where it is. And that is a subtle element of this roof. And again, simply through walking on the roof, you slow down. You slow down your pace. And you actually meet the sky, because the roof is shaped in a way that the railing on the other side is sunken. I think you call it a monkey pit. It's, you know, the ones you have in zoos, and you throw peanuts to the monkeys, and you don't want to fall in. So that means the roof actually meets the sky, and it gathers crowds of people, which again has to do with public ownership. If we're spending public money, then you have to give it back to the people. How do you do that? By being intimate with the people you're giving it back to. You allow them not only accessibility, but you allow them to play on and with the thing you're giving back. So of course, this issue of closeness and intimacy in this type of architecture becomes essential. And only then is it a true negotiator between society, elements, and its function. What we're doing now is we're gathering crowds of people on the roof for concerts and stuff. And these are youngsters, many of them, and they will go to the opera when they're 20 or 25. So what you're doing is you're not necessarily breaking down the elements of the refined opera, but what you're doing is you're giving it something more and in addition. And of course, these issues become crucial when you talk about public ownership. In the Nordic region, we have something called allemansretten, or allemansretten, which means you can walk anywhere you want, at any time, and I can walk wherever I want, anytime. You can even, within a radius of 50 meters, put up a tent. Outside the radius of 50 meters, you can put up a tent by a house. Or, a very old law says you can knock on any door and get into the toilet. Now, this public ownership element is extremely important, and that means you have to allow people to use it in many different manners. And, you know, many different manners happens all the time. is, of course, important. And this division between, let's call it upper level culture and subculture, is extremely important because they are depending on each other. And you can't separate them. So if you don't have one, you don't have the other. And that's why the availability of these type of products, like the Opera House, definitely today, in a social understanding of architecture, needs to be a lot more than just a piece of symmetrical, processional, straight through the main entrance into the lobby kind of building. Totally different though is when we work in desert regions. Now this is fascinating because the ocean is not so different from the desert. It's a little hotter. This is for a competition for the Dharam Cultural Center by Aramco. And it is a competition movie. And I'll explain a little more about what it afterwards. Now, this is a building we're constructing for the moment. It's a huge challenge, I have to say. It's almost to the extent that we don't know exactly how to deal with it. But it becomes something that is part of an investigation, part of research, energy research. But most of all, it's a social experiment. In Saudi Arabia today, women cannot go to the movies. In this building, we have the first cinema for women and men. They meet in the library, in the cultural house. They meet in the concert house, in the museum. And it's with the help of Saudi Aramco, which is the oil company, trying to build up the cultures that the new generation of Saudi need to liberate themselves from the most radical Islam. Now, if you take that into account, that the changes that we're foreseeing in the future always have to come from the inside and never from the outside, then we should be very conscious that culture is a driving force in these changes, and these cultures have to be derived from the inside. So, why is this picture here? I don't know if you know the book Invisible Cities by Paolo Calvino. There is a discussion between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo on the Roman wall, on the Roman arch. He says, the keystone is the culture of this society. If you take it out, the whole arch tumbles, it falls down. Now, this building does the same, as you can see. If you take out this keystone here, then the whole structure falls. And it's the experimentation of what we call interdependencies of objects, where the forces are derived both horizontally and vertically, between themselves and finally into the ground. Now this project now, for us, is a demonstration that the possibilities of tectonic elements and these pebbles, as we call them, sort of get almost to the limit of a production line that we can cope with. First of all, because the heat here reaches almost 80 degrees on the surface of the building, centigrade. 80 degrees centigrade means that the building starts vibrating in the heat. But it also means that we have to take care of this heat somehow, and we have to do it environmentally sound. So we started looking at cladding systems that on one hand could manage to take care of this complex geometry. On the other hand, be simple to produce, and thirdly, be like a convector for this building. So we started developing these pipes that actually wrap around each of these pebbles as a pattern. And this pattern becomes a fingerprint for each of these elements. It starts with the entrance opening, and then it just follows the shape of the pebble, and the intermediate relationship between geometry of the pebble and the opening becomes essential. So these are the tubes that you see, stainless steel tubes. And whenever there is a window, you just squeeze the pipes flat, of course, and then you have a sunscreen at the same time. So this is the prototype that we just put up on site. This is about 20 by 20 meters, or 12 by 12 meters. And you see here sort of the joints and the elements of these pipes. And in effect, we produced, you know, the machines they use for computerized generation of pipes for railings. We took the same machine, just expanded it for a wider pipe. So here you see the pictures. Now, interesting to me is that these stateless pebbles actually penetrate through the ground, and inside this building we're using the sandstone of the site to create rammed earth walls. So you have these stainless steel pipes coming in, but the rest is rammed earth from the site. So you have one element which is high tech, and you have one element which is very archaic. You have one which is sculptural, and you have one which is materialized. Just some snapshots. The lifelong learning tower, and desert. Desert is a fantastic thing. I have to show you another film. Do we have time still? Are you bored? I'm bored, but okay, we'll show the rest. Now, this is another desert project, and you know, Rem Koolhaas is doing something behind there. You'll see it soon, but in effect, yes, this is almost to a size where it's incredible. You know, you remember this cat fountain? This building is about 600,000 square meters. It's a Norwegian singer, and it's Norwegian music. then here, here, this is then for us. Now I'm showing you this project only because there is something that actually is very interesting, and that is that the soil in Vasikarma is so fantastic that we can produce great porcelain. It has a tile production company, and we're using the local soil to develop these tiles that actually can take up to 6 meters in radius, and we're producing the whole cladding in porcelain locally. And that means you generate a heat shield on top of this building, which reflects more than 25% of the solar energy. And whenever you have a window, of course, you just replace the porcelain tile with glass. Yeah, I have so much to show you guys. I don't want to go into it, but I want to show you one last movie. I'm so tired of talking now. So. This is a wonderful project, by the way. It's a research center in the fjord of Trondheim, and it's one of the initiatives from our new Minister of what is it called in business. Well, he's looking at the future after the oil is over. What do we do? Okay, we go into the ocean and we develop the resources and research on this issue. So this is part of that. Small island. Now, as very ending of the story, we did the pavilion in Geneva for this little electrical car called Think. And you know the fantastic thing about Think, which or with electrical cars, which I don't have to tell you, is because they don't have any emission. And that means they can operate in a closed environment. So, together with the advertising company, we made this little way of presenting that.